The ice in the glass chattered, a frantic percussion that betrayed the trembling of her hands. The poison was clear, odorless, and final, a silent promise of death held within a crystal decanter. Behind the mahogany bar of the Moonbeam Jazz Club, Imani Clark felt her chest tighten until she could barely breathe. Her tears fell, hot and silent, splashing onto the counter as she stared at the amber liquid that was supposed to buy her sister's life. Then a shadow fell over the bar. Yoon Min-ho sat perfectly still, 6'2", wrapped in a sharp midnight blue suit that cost more than Imani's soul. His expression was a mask of unreadable glass, his dark eyes watching her with a quiet, predatory authority that made the air in the room feel heavy and thin. The most feared mafia boss in the city, the Viper of Seoul, was watching his favorite bartender cry as she prepared his execution. He didn't reach for the handgun hidden beneath his silk lapel. He didn't call for the black-suited guards standing by the door. He simply leaned forward, his voice a low, velvet rumble that cut through the jazz music like a blade. "Are you going to pour that, Imani, or are you waiting for me to die of thirst first?" His gaze dropped to the small vial hidden in her palm. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Did the golden dragon promise she'd be safe once my heart stopped?" he murmured. Before Imani could gasp, he reached across the wood, took the poisoned bottle from her paralyzed fingers, poured a double shot, and swallowed it in one jagged gulp. Imani's scream was swallowed by the roar of the saxophone in the background as she waited for him to collapse. She waited for the convulsions, the blood, the end of the world. But Yoon Min-ho didn't die. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. He slammed the empty glass onto the counter with a sound like a gunshot and reached out, his thumb catching a stray tear on her cheek. His touch was terrifyingly steady. "I switched the bottles 2 hours ago," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I prefer apple juice when I'm being assassinated." He had known that the syndicate had cornered her, known that her younger sister, Shelley, was being held in a dark room somewhere near the docks, known that Imani had been breaking into pieces behind this bar for 3 nights straight. He had watched her hesitate, watched her struggle with the weight of the poison, watched her choose her sister over her own safety, and fail to be a killer. In his world, that failure changed everything. She wasn't a traitor to be disposed of, she was a resource to be claimed. Because when you fail to murder a man like Yoon Min-ho, you don't get to go back to your shift. You become his property, his protection, his obsession. But to understand how a desperate black bartender ended up standing in the eye of a mafia storm with poison in her hands, you have to go back. Back to a debt that wasn't hers. Back to a boyfriend's ultimate betrayal. Back to the moment Imani Clark realized that the monster she was sent to destroy was the only man who could actually save her, not knowing that he needed her blood just as much as she needed his mercy. The poison was gone, the choice was made, and the Viper had just decided that he wasn't letting her go. Welcome back to the gallery. Stay with me till the end. Show some love by hitting like and subscribe. Comment where you're watching from, and you're absolutely amazing. Let's get into the story. The roar of the engine died as the elevator doors slid open directly into a world of glass and steel. Yoon Min-ho didn't wait for Imani to move. He gripped her elbow, guiding her firmly across the polished obsidian floors of his penthouse. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city was a sprawling carpet of neon, but Imani felt like she had been plunged into an icy ocean. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Her uniform was still damp from the spilled whiskey at the bar, the scent of the poison clinging to her skin. "You're in the only place in this city where you're still breathing," Min-ho said. He didn't look at her. He walked toward a curved wall of monitors that flickered to life at his approach. "Sit." Imani sank into a leather chair that felt too soft, too expensive. Her eyes were drawn to the center screen. Her breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat. The footage was graining, bathed in the sickly green of night vision, but she knew that silhouette. It was a small, cramped room with a single mattress. On it sat Shelley, her younger sister, clutching a tattered teddy bear. Two men in dark tactical gear stood by the door, their faces obscured. "Shelley!" Imani gasped, reaching for the screen as if she could pull the girl through the glass. "The Golden Dragon Syndicate has her at a holding facility near the docks," Min-ho said, standing behind her. His presence was a cold weight, his shadow stretching across the monitors. "They're waiting for my heart to stop. When it doesn't, they'll kill her to send a message." Imani turned, her eyes wide and pleading. "Please, you have to save her. I'll do anything. I'll go to the police. "The police belong to the dragons, Imani, and right now, so do you." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. The cold authority in his gaze was suffocating. "I have my own men positioned 2 blocks from that room. 1 word from me, and they move. But that word has a price." He straightened his cuffs, the sharp lines of his suit mocking her disheveled state. "You tried to kill me tonight. In my world, that is a debt paid in blood. But I'm offering you a different currency. From this moment, your life is not your own. You eat when I tell you. You sleep where I command. And when the time comes, you will give me exactly what I need to stay alive." Imani looked from the terrifying man above her back to the flickering image of her sister. The cage was made of gold and glass, but it was a cage nonetheless. "Do we have a deal, bartender?" Imani swallowed the last of her pride, her head bowing. "Yes." "Good," Min-ho murmured, his hand briefly grazing her shoulder, a touch that felt less like a comfort and more like a brand. "Welcome to the Empire." The penthouse was silent, save for the hum of the air filtration and the distant rhythmic thud of something heavy hitting the floor in the soundproofed basement below. Min-ho didn't say a word as he led Imani down a service elevator, his hand a steady, burning presence on the small of her back. When the doors opened, the smell of damp concrete and metallic tang hit her senses. In the center of the room, a man was strapped to a steel chair, a single industrial light overhead casting harsh shadows across his bruised face. Imani's heart stopped. "Marcus?" she whispered, the name tasting like ash. The man flinched, his eyes swelling shut as he squinted through the glare. "Imani? Imani, baby, tell them! Tell them I didn't mean it!" Imani moved forward, her hands trembling, but Min-ho's arm barred her path like a steel beam. "Don't go closer," he warned, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "He isn't the man you remember. He never was." Min-ho tossed a thick manila folder onto a nearby table. It spilled open to reveal bank statements, gambling markers, and photographs. Photos of Imani leaving the bar, photos of Shelley at school, all of them time-stamped months ago. "Your debt didn't happen by accident, Imani," Min-ho said, stepping into the light, his silhouette towering over the shivering man. "The Golden Dragon Syndicate didn't find you, they were invited. Marcus here had a gambling debt that was going to cost him his hands. so he offered them a trade: your life, your sister's safety, and the predatory info they needed to blackmail a bartender into my inner circle. Imani felt the floor tilt. "Marcus, is this true?" "They were gonna kill me, Imani," Marcus wailed, his voice thin and pathetic. "I thought if you just did the job, we'd be free. I was gonna come back for you." The betrayal was a physical blow, sharper than any knife. The man she had shared a bed with, the man she thought was her anchor in a crumbling world, had been the one to sink the ship. He hadn't just watched her drown, he had pushed her in for a payout. Min-ho stepped behind Marcus, his fingers resting lightly on the man's throat. He looked at Imani, his expression unreadable, almost hauntingly honest. "In my world, the monsters wear their faces openly. We don't hide behind love or promises. I am a killer, Imani. I am a thief, but I have never lied to you." He leaned down, whispering into Marcus's ear just loud enough for her to hear. "She was never going to be free. You knew that." Imani looked at Marcus, the man she loved, and saw a hollow stranger. Then she looked at Min-ho, the monster who held her captive, and saw the only truth she had left. "Get him out of my sight," she said, her voice turning cold, a new, harder edge forming in her soul. Min-ho signaled his guards, his eyes never leaving hers. "As you wish, bartender." The silence of the penthouse was shattered by a heavy, muffled thud that echoed from behind the double oak doors of Min-ho's private study. Imani, who had been pacing the hallway, didn't hesitate. She pushed the doors open to find the viper of soul on his knees, one hand clutching the edge of a mahogany desk, the other pressed hard against his chest. His breathing was a ragged, wet sound, and his usually bronze skin had turned a terrifying shade of ash. Before she could reach him, a side door opened, and a man in a white lab coat rushed in, moving with the practiced speed of someone who had seen this collapse many times before. Between them, they managed to get Min-ho onto a reclined leather sofa. "The toxicity levels are spiking," the doctor muttered, prepping a syringe with clinical efficiency. He glanced up at Imani, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "You must be Miss Clark. I'm Dr. Han. It's fortunate you're here. We are running out of time." Imani watched as the doctor stabilized Min-ho's tremors. "Toxicity? What are you talking about? He's the most powerful man in the city. How is he this fragile?" "It's a rare degenerative blood disorder, a gift from his lineage. His body produces proteins that are essentially poisoning his own nervous system. Most men with this condition don't see 30. The only thing keeping him standing is a constant cycle of high-grade plasma transfusions." The doctor looked at a digital readout on a tablet, then back at Imani. "He didn't find you at that bar by accident, Imani."
My team spent 2 years scouring global databases for a donor with your specific, ultra-rare antibody markers. You weren't scouted to be a maid or a victim. You were scouted to be a harvest." The word felt like a slap. Imani looked at Min-ho, whose eyes were slowly fluttering open. The predatory boss who had claimed her was now a man vibrating with a pain she couldn't imagine. "Leave us, Han," Min-ho rasped, his voice barely a ghost of its former command. The doctor hesitated, then bowed and exited, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the room. Min-ho looked up at Imani, his gaze weary. "He's right. When I first sat at your bar, I didn't see a woman. I saw a biological miracle, a way to stop the clock on my own death. I was going to take what I needed, by force if necessary." He reached out, his fingers trembling as they hovered near her hand, not quite touching her. "But then I watched you. I watched you cry over a man you were supposed to kill. I watched you choose your sister's life over your own soul. And for the first time in my life, I found something more precious than my own survival." He closed his eyes, a grimace of pain crossing his face. "I can't do it, Imani. I can't just use you. I'd rather the poison take me than see that look of fear in your eyes every time I touch you." The digital chime of an incoming secure line cut through the heavy atmosphere of the study like a serrated blade. Min-ho, still pale but fueled by a surge of adrenaline, reached for his tablet. He didn't hide the screen from Imani. Instead, he pulled her into the camera's frame, his arms solid and possessive around her waist. The screen flickered to life, revealing a man sitting in a room of traditional lacquered wood and ancient silk. Chairman Park looked less like a mobster and more like a grandfatherly statesman, but his eyes were as cold as a winter morning in Seoul. "You look unwell, nephew," Park began, his voice thin and mocking. "The viper's fangs seem to be falling out. My sources tell me your heart is stuttering and your blood is turning to ash." Min-ho's grip on Imani tightened, his knuckles white. "Your sources are as pathetic as your ambitions, uncle. I'm standing, aren't I?" "For now," Park countered, his gaze shifting to Imani. He smiled, a slow, predatory movement. "So this is the miracle cure, the girl with the golden blood. You're hiding a treasure behind that bar counter, Min-ho, but it's a treasure that belongs to the syndicate. Hand her over by midnight, and I might consider letting your little sister live long enough to say goodbye." Imani felt the blood drain from her face. The mention of Shelley made her knees weak, but Min-ho's strength held her upright. He leaned into the camera, his expression shifting into something terrifyingly feral, the face of the monster the world feared. "She isn't a cure, Park, and she isn't a treasure for you to hoard," Min-ho rasped, his voice vibrating with a deadly promise. He looked directly into the lens, then turned to press a firm, lingering kiss against Imani's temple in full view of the chairman. "She is my queen, and in this city, you don't touch the queen without losing your head." The chairman's smile vanished. "You would start a war for a donor? You're dying, Min-ho. Don't burn the empire down on your way out." "I'll burn the whole world if it means keeping her safe," Min-ho growled. "You have 48 hours to return the girl's sister. If Shelley isn't at my gates by then, I will stop pretending to be a businessman. I will come for you, and I will make the golden dragon bleed until there's nothing left but a memory." He swiped the screen black before Park could respond. The silence that followed was deafening. Min-ho turned to Imani, his eyes searching hers, the coldness of the mafia boss melting into a desperate sincerity. 48 hours, he whispered. "That's all the time I could buy us." "And then?" Imani asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "And then," he said, reaching for his gun on the desk, "we show them why they should have let us stay at the bar." The sky over Seoul had finally broken, pouring a heavy, rhythmic rain that turned the neon signs of the Gangnam district into bleeding smears of pink and blue. Inside the armored black sedan, the atmosphere was thick with a different kind of storm. Min-ho sat beside Imani, his jaw tight, his eyes darting to the side mirrors every few seconds. He looked stronger after the transfusion, but the way his hand gripped his thigh told her the pain was still clawing at him. "Stay low," he commanded, his voice barely audible over the drumming rain. "Min-ho, what is—" The words were cut off by the sharp, metallic crack of a high-caliber round shattering the rear window. The glass didn't break, it spiderwebbed into a white, opaque mess, but the force of the impact sent the car fishtailing across the slick asphalt. "Get down!" Min-ho roared. Before Imani could react, His hand was in her hair, forcing her head toward the floorboards, and his massive frame was draped over her like a living shield. The driver slammed the wheel to the left, tires screaming as they veered into a narrow alleyway. Behind them, 2 motorcycles and a gray SUV roared in pursuit, the muzzle flashes of submachine guns lighting up the dark rain. Bullets peppered the door panels with a sound like hailstones from hell. Min-ho groaned, a sharp intake of breath that vibrated against Imani's back. "You're hit!" she screamed, trying to sit up, but he pinned her down with a desperate strength. "Don't move," he hissed through gritted teeth. "I've got you." The car drifted sideways, slamming through a row of trash bins before merging back onto the main highway. The speedometer climbed, 120, 140, 160 kilometers per hour. The world outside was a neon blur of light and water. Min-ho reached into his jacket, pulling a sleek black handgun, and rolled his window down just an inch. He fired 3 precise shots, and the lead motorcycle crumpled into a ball of flame that vanished in the rearview mirror. As the car finally swerved into the hidden entrance of a secure underground parking garage, the silence that followed was deafening. The driver killed the engine, and Min-ho slowly rolled off Imani. She scrambled up, her hands searching him frantically. A dark stain was spreading across the shoulder of his white dress shirt, the silk torn where a bullet had grazed the muscle. It wasn't deep, but it was close. Too close. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she looked into his dark, tired eyes. "You need my blood to live. If I died, you'd have a chance to harvest what's left. Why would you put yourself between me and a bullet?" Min-ho leaned his head back against the leather seat, a ghost of a smirk touching his bloodless lips. "I told you, Imani, you're my queen. I don't protect my medicine, I protect my heart."
The air in the safe house's underground medical bay was sterile, smelling of ozone and antiseptic, a stark contrast to the rain-soaked chaos they had just escaped. Min-ho sat on the edge of the surgical table, his tailored jacket discarded on the floor like a piece of useless armor. His white shirt was rolled down to his waist, revealing a physique built for war, now marred by the jagged, angry red graze of a bullet across his shoulder. Imani's hands shook as she threaded the surgical needle. She was a bartender, used to slicing garnishes and pouring spirits, not stitching the flesh of a dying king. "I can't do this," she whispered, the needle hovering inches from his skin. "I'm not a doctor, Min-ho. I'll hurt you." Min-ho reached out, his steady hand covering her trembling fingers. He guided the needle toward the wound. "You've already seen the worst of me, Imani. A few stitches won't change that." He looked up at her, his dark eyes clouded with a cocktail of exhaustion and something softer, something that looked dangerously like devotion. "Just breathe. Look at me, not the blood." She took a shuddering breath and began. With every stitch, the silence between them grew heavier, filled with the unspoken reality of their situation. He didn't flinch, not even when the thread pulled taut against his skin. As she finished and taped the bandage into place, her fingers lingered on his collarbone. "You're weaker than you were at the bar," she noted, her voice barely audible. "The chase, it took too much out of you." "The toxicity is aggressive," he admitted, his head leaning back against the cold wall. "My heart is fighting a war it wasn't designed to win. 48 hours is an eternity when your blood is turning to lead." Imani looked at the transfusion equipment standing ready in the corner, the clear tubes and the empty bags designed to hold the miracle he needed. She realized then that he wasn't going to ask. He was going to walk into the final battle with Chairman Park half dead, rather than force her to give up a piece of herself. She stood up and walked to the chair, rolling up the sleeve of her black uniform. "What are you doing?" he rasped. "I'm not medicine, and I'm not a harvest," she said, meeting his gaze with a fierce, newfound clarity. but I am the only one who can make sure you're strong enough to bring my sister home. Take what you need, Min-ho, not because you own me, but because I'm choosing to give it to you." A flicker of shock crossed his face, followed by a profound, humbled silence. As Dr. Han entered to begin the procedure, Min-ho reached across the gap between them, lacing his fingers through hers. As the crimson began to flow through the tubes, the bond between them shifted from a debt of fear to a pact of blood. They weren't just a boss and a bartender anymore. They were two souls sharing the same heartbeat, preparing to burn the city down together. The fog at the Incheon docks was thick, tasting of salt and industrial exhaust. Towering shipping containers rose like rusted monuments in the dark, creating a labyrinth where every shadow seemed to hold a rifle. Min-ho stepped out of the black sedan, his silhouette sharp against the hazy glow of the pier lights. He looked transformed. The transfusion had brought a deadly vitality back to his frame, though the paleness of his skin still betrayed the battle raging in his veins. In the back seat, Marcus was a trembling wreck, his hands zip-tied and his mouth taped. He was the offering, the decoy meant to draw Chairman Park's focus while Min-ho's snipers looked for an opening. "Stay in the car, Imani," Min-ho said, leaning into the open window. His voice was a low, velvet command.
"Lock the doors. If I don't signal in 10 minutes, the driver takes you straight to the airfield. No arguments." "Min-ho, it's a trap," Imani whispered, her fingers digging into the leather upholstery. "You know he won't just give Shelley back." "I know," he murmured, reaching in to brush his thumb across her cheek one last time. "That's why I have to go in alone. He needs to see me vulnerable. He needs to think the poison has already won." He didn't wait for her protest. With a sharp nod to his men, they dragged Marcus toward the center of the pier, where a circle of black SUVs waited. Min-ho walked into the light, his hands empty, his posture radiating a suicidal kind of arrogance. Imani watched through the glass, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She saw Chairman Park emerge from the shadows, flanked by a dozen armed men. She saw the glint of steel and heard the distant, muffled sound of her sister's cry. The 10-minute mark hadn't even passed when Imani saw a movement in the periphery, a second team of Golden Dragon hitmen closing in on Min-ho's flank, guns raised. He couldn't see them. He was focused on the chairman, playing the part of the dying king. "He's gonna get killed!" she gasped. "Ma'am, the boss gave orders," the driver began, but Imani was already moving. She didn't have a gun, and she didn't have a plan, but she had the one thing the Golden Dragon hadn't factored into their cold equations, a woman who had already lost everything once and refused to lose it again. She slammed her shoulder against the door, bursting out into the freezing mist. "Imani, get back!" Min-ho's voice rang out across the pier, his head snapping toward her, his mask of calm finally shattering. She didn't stop. She ran toward the center of the killing floor, her black uniform a blur in the fog. "Park!" she screamed, drawing every eye to her. "You want the cure? Here I am! Let the girl go!" The air turned electric with sudden, violent tension. Min-ho reached for his weapon, his eyes burning with a terrifying mix of fury and fear for her. The exchange was over. The war had begun. The first shot didn't come from Min-ho, but from a sniper in the cranes. It tore through the hood of a Golden Dragon SUV, and then the night dissolved into a symphony of fire and shattering glass. "Get down!" Min-ho screamed, but Imani was already a shadow moving through the fog. She didn't run away from the chaos. She ran into the belly of the docks. Her father had spent 30 years in this labyrinth, and she had spent her childhood playing hide-and-seek among these very containers. While the world exploded behind her, the heavy thud of grenades and the rhythmic stutter of submachine guns, Imani navigated by instinct.
She ducked under a rusted conveyor belt and scrambled up a maintenance ladder that shouldn't have been there, according to the dragon's maps. Below her, the pier was a killing floor. Min-ho was a whirlwind of violent precision, moving through the mist like the monster he had always claimed to be. He didn't use his gun anymore. He was a blur of silver steel and raw power, cutting through Park's elite guard to get to the center. Imani dropped from a gantry onto the roof of the holding office. Through the skylight, she saw Shelley huddled in the corner, a guard raising a weapon as the door was kicked in. Imani didn't think. She grabbed a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall and shattered the glass, dropping into the room like a vengeful spirit. The guard turned, startled, but Imani swung with the weight of every tear she'd shed. The metal connected with a sickening crunch. "Shelley, run!" she cried, scooping her sister into her arms just as the back wall of the office groaned and buckled. Outside, the circle had closed. Min-ho and Chairman Park stood alone in the center of the docks, the rain washing the blood from their faces. Park drew a traditional short sword, his eyes gleaming with a final, desperate madness. "You're a corpse walking, nephew," he spat. Min-ho didn't answer.
He dodged the first swing, the blade whistling past his throat, and stepped into the old man's guard. With a roar that drowned out the sirens, Min-ho gripped Park's wrist, the sound of breaking bone echoing off the containers. He drove his knee into the chairman's chest and, with a final, brutal twist, sent the man who had torn their lives apart to the concrete. Min-ho didn't use a blade to finish it. He used his bare hands, ensuring the last thing his uncle saw was the face of the man who had outlived him. As the remaining syndicate members fled into the night, Min-ho turned, his chest heaving, blood dripping from his knuckles. He saw Imani emerging from the smoke, clutching a sobbing Shelley to her chest. He stumbled toward them, his strength finally failing, and collapsed to his knees. Imani caught him, pulling his head to her shoulder, the three of them forming a broken, beautiful circle in the ruins of the empire. "We're home," she whispered into the dark. "Min-ho, we're home." 3 months later, the scent of expensive bourbon and jasmine hung in the air of the renovated lounge. The dim, flickering lights of the old dive bar had been replaced by recessed gold fixtures that cast a warm, amber glow over the velvet booths. It was the most exclusive spot in the city now, a place where deals were made in whispers, and the chaos of the streets felt a world away. Imani stood behind the polished mahogany counter, her posture graceful and assured. She wasn't wearing the thin polyester uniform of a struggling girl anymore. Instead, she wore a backless silk dress the color of midnight, her hair styled in an elegant sweep that caught the light. When the front doors opened, she didn't flinch. She didn't have to. Yoon Min-ho walked in, the rhythmic click of his shoes on the marble floor announcing his arrival. He looked healthier than she had ever seen him, the sallow paleness of his skin replaced by a vibrant, steady strength. He didn't sit at the end of the bar like a predator hunting a mark. He walked straight to the center, his eyes fixed on Imani with an intensity that still made her breath hitch. "The place looks different," he murmured, his voice a low, familiar rumble. "It needed a new soul," Imani replied, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She reached for a crystal mixing glass, her movements fluid and confident. She didn't tremble as she measured the spirits. She didn't cry as she stirred the ice. She slid a glass across the counter toward him. The liquid inside was a deep, translucent crimson, the color of a sunset, or perhaps the color of the pact they had made in the dark. "The signature cocktail," she said softly. "I call it the Viper's Vow." Min-ho picked up the glass, swirling the liquid. He looked at it for a moment, then back at her. He didn't check for a switch. He didn't look for a hidden vial. He took a slow, deliberate sip and let out a satisfied breath. "It's perfect," he said. He reached across the bar, his hand covering hers. His grip was warm and solid, no longer the touch of a captor, but that of a partner. In the back room, Shelley was finishing her homework, safe and laughing. Outside, the Golden Dragon was a memory, and the city knew a new name. Min-ho raised his glass in a silent toast, his eyes reflecting the woman who had saved him in more ways than one. To the Empire, Imani. To us, she whispered back. The poison was gone, the choice was made, and the man who was once her target was now her heartbeat. Behind the bar where she had once prayed for a miracle, Imani Clark finally had everything she had ever dreamed of, and a king who would burn the world to keep it that way.